Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
And welcome back from a 2-week break. I know you must have missed us terribly. So I know I missed you all, so great to see you all. Here we are this week, and I anticipate the White House wanted to celebrate the first 100 days, maybe commemorate, maybe a better phrase to use. It really has been a 100 days of failure, quite frankly, for this administration, outside the appointment of Mr. Gorsuch as the 9th member of the Supreme Court, which took the changing of the Senate rules to accomplish. Very little the White House itself did beyond the nomination itself. We look at all the other failures of achievement in this first 100 days. I don't say this gleefully because the American people are the ones that suffer because of the lack of attention and focus on the issues that they're concerned about. Nothing in terms of jobs in our economy, nothing to show for in terms of health care, and absolutely nothing to show for draining the swamp. And my colleagues will talk about those issues after me. But I wanted to start with the other broken promises that the President has made to the American people. Promises he made and he broke. He promised tax reform to help middle America, to help the average worker, the average person in the United States. So far, the other proposals we've seen are proposals to help the wealthiest in our nation. They talk about revenue neutral initially here in the House, now but not distributionally neutral, meaning that the wealthy will pay less, middle class and the poor will pay more. And now the President has come out with a plan of 15% for pass-through entities as well as C corporations. A couple of sweeteners for Democrats apparently to entice us. But it's a plan to help the wealthiest in this country, the wealthiest corporations in the world, at the expense of our nation's deficit. We look at the budget. In his attempt to plus up the defense side by 10%, $54 billion, he would cut Meals on Wheels. He would cut job training. He would cut many of the things that we need to help grow our economy and invest in the people of this country. Infrastructure. The hint could not have been louder after the election. If there was an issue that Democrats could possibly work with the President on and get off to a good working relationship, infrastructure. There's not a single concrete plan to repair roads, tunnels, bridges, and invest in the future of our country. It was a missed opportunity these first 100 days. Our hope, on behalf of the American people, is that the next 100 days is not full of lies, not full of we shoulda, coulda, woulda, but what we're going to do to help advance the American people, to help advance our country. We're all Americans. We all, Democrat, Republican alike, we get that. But we need to see cooperation. We need to see a president who's willing to work with Democrats and not ask us to simply work in silos on issues we can agree on, but also stop attacking our constituents directly. Speaking on behalf of myself, I've said this over and over again. I want to work on the issue of infrastructure, on tax reform. I think Democrats and Republicans alike look at the code itself right now. We see a lot of problems with it. We want to address those issues in a bipartisan way. But it's very difficult to attack those issues and work on those issues when my constituency feels under threat by this president. So there needs to be more radical change in the way in which the president is approaching his office. I'm hopeful. I pray. I pray for the president. I pray for the people around him, that they'll see the light, that they want to work and move in a more bipartisan way. It hasn't happened yet, but hope springs eternal. And with that, I'll turn it over now to the Vice Chair of the Democratic Caucus and my good friend, Chairlady from California, Linda Sanchez.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, everyone. President Trump campaigned on keeping jobs here at home, creating more jobs, and buying and hiring Americans. But in his first 100 days, President Trump has still not put forward a single concrete job-creating bill. And he's done nothing to help working women get ahead. For example, he promised to introduce an infrastructure package in the first 100 days of his presidency. That hasn't happened. He promised to do something to help lower the cost of childcare for hardworking Americans. And except for lip service and this morning a little window dressing, he hasn't done that. He's even proposed to cut job training programs at the Department of Labor, making it harder for people to get the training they need for the jobs of tomorrow. Donald Trump, quite simply, has failed on the campaign promises that he made to the American people. His talk's been tough, but the actions have been incredibly weak. His string of broken promises is probably why he has the lowest approval rating of any president ever polled at this early in their term. After nearly 100 days of Trump presidency, the American people are growing tired of all of the broken promises. Too many Americans still struggle to get by. They're working harder and they're working longer just to make ends meet. We are here because we want to see the president lay out a detailed proposal, not just a handful of broad brushstrokes and talking points, and not more insincere promises. The fabricator-in-chief can't talk his way through the next 4 years. We need to see some concrete action that puts hardworking Americans first. And with that, I'd like to turn over to a colleague of mine from California, member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Tony Cardenas.
Thank you very much, Linda. Appreciate this opportunity, Congressman Crowley, for us to remind everybody about where we're at approaching 100 days of this presidency. I'm going to talk a bit about health care. Trump's first 100 days has been nothing but a hot mess. Nothing is a better example of that than the Republicans' health care repeal attempts. Not reform, it's been repeal. The Republicans' plan would strip coverage from millions of Americans. Folks would be forced to pay more for less, which is the exact opposite of what this president had promised on the campaign trail. What's more, that their plan puts an age tax on our seniors and gave a huge tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires should they have been successful. Their plan would take us back to the dark ages, when people faced discrimination for pre-existing conditions like pregnancy and your child's asthma, when a trip to the hospital would break the bank. In these first 100 days, all we've seen are healthcare policies that would hurt the American people and the American economy. Instead of working with us to improve Americans' healthcare and to make our country healthier, the Republicans are hell-bent on tearing insurance away from millions of families. That's healthcare insurance. In these 100 days, instead of moving America forward, Trump has moved us backwards. And this inaction is hurting our economy, it's hurting families. And when I say back to the dark ages, I had a town hall meeting in my district where a gentleman asked a question in front of 150 of his neighbors, and he basically said that he took 3 trips to the hospital, 4 hospital stays, and 3 operations. And he said, my premiums have gone up a bit. And I said, okay. And then when he was done, I asked him a question. I said, did this happen before or after the Affordable Care Act kicked in? He said, all of this happened after. And I said, what would have happened to you had you had 3 operations and 4 hospital stays before the Affordable Care Act? Before I could finish my question, he said, oh, they would have taken away my house. Please understand, ladies and gentlemen, what the Affordable Care Act has done. It not only has addressed health care, it addressed the fear of actually getting health care when you need it. And with that, I'll turn the opportunity over to my colleague from the Aloha State, Ms. Hanabusa.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Joe and Linda, for putting this together. Good morning, I'm Colleen Hanabusa, and I am the representative from Hawaii's 1st Congressional District. I'm also here honored to be the leader of the 27 strong freshman Democrats who stand together with us today. That is why I wanted to focus on a campaign promise made by President Trump. Very appropriate in that this is his first 100 days. If you look back, President Trump spoke to the American people, really the American working people, and said he would drain the swamp in Washington, D.C. And the inference was he would come to Washington, D.C., clean house, which meant to get rid of the self-dealing consultants and lobbyists. What in reality has happened, we all know, everyone here. and that Donald Trump has done nothing, in fact, the opposite. We all know about Michael Flynn, who resigned as the president's first national security advisor. He failed to disclose payments he received from the Russian government and Russian entities, and then after he is removed from the NSA, registers as a foreign agent lobbying on behalf of Turkey. There's no excuse for Michael Flynn. Even the Oversight Committee seems to be bipartisan in the fact that he has broken the laws. President Trump's former campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, now runs this huge lobbying firm with a number of former Trump advisors. Yet, Trump has said lobbyists are going to be stopped. Instead, we see them growing and growing in influence if they had connections to this president. They were not stopped at all. Consider the White House visitors log, which under President Obama was public, so you knew who was seeing the president. We don't have that. In the same light, we don't have his tax returns to know whether or not there are any connections. It makes you wonder why. Why can't he release those tax returns? Talk about conflicts of interest. We have Ivanka Trump, special assistant to the president, who obtained trademarks that we all know that they were working for from China. It happens on the day she met the Chinese leader. And finally, the ties to Russia. If there's anything we all know, is the fact that they have been ties to Russia. Russia has also influenced our elections. Question is whether they're continuing to do more of the same. People want that investigation, and yet we haven't seen it happen. What does he have to hide? All of these things have a common denominator, and that is that they do not value, the president does not value transparency, openness, and promises he made to the American public. With that, I'd like to turn it back to Chairman Joe Crowley.
I would just also say, and I would thank my colleagues for being here as well, just to add to that, that the connection between Russia and the investigation and the president's own tax returns. He still refuses to disclose his tax returns, and we're interested for a myriad of issues, not only as it relates to tax reform, which the president is proposing, and how that may very well benefit him and his empire, as well as, and I'm not speaking about the United States when I speak about the empire, I'm speaking about his business empire. And most importantly, we should be concerned about what impact it has on our nation. But also as it pertains to how he has borrowed money and whom he is beholden to. Well, that includes anyone closely related to Mr. Putin and his regime. So with that, we'll open up for questions.
Here we are on Wednesday morning. We've run out of funding on Friday night. How concerned are you all about what may be happening in terms of a government funding extension?
Well, I think the American people are concerned about the ability of government to continue to function. And I think Democrats have been supportive of keeping government open. We have a record in the past of working in a bipartisan way with our Republican colleagues when they could not get the votes in their own caucus to keep government operating, to come to Democrats and work with us to keep the lights on. We stand ready and committed to work with our Republican colleagues in a bipartisan way. What we've said in the past and will continue to say, that there'll be no wall, and we're pleased that the president has indicated he's backing off from a wall. But we want to see the bill itself. We want to see what actually is in the bill as it pertains to border security, as it pertains to the possibility of hiring additional border security and guards, whether or not there are additional beds, and particularly private beds, that for the purpose of detention. Those are also issues that we're concerned about, the so-called border enhancement. But we are pleased the president is finally backing off of the wall. He first said that Mexico would build this beautiful wall, and every time there was some outcry about it, it would grow 10 feet taller. That wall will not be built. It's not going to happen. And I think the sooner the better the president realizes that there's no appetite, not only from Democrats, but for Republicans along the border as well, do not want to see that wall ever built. And so they continue to work. My understanding is that The four appropriators continue House Republican minority and majority, Democrat minority, Republican majority, and their counterparts in the Senate continue to work. And our hope is that we will have a clean bill, and we'll move forward.
Can I follow up
I
on
don't know if my
that?
colleagues want to respond too, but, yes.
I'm sorry, I wanted to follow up on the issue of cost-sharing reductions as part of the issue on the omnibus or CR. There's a disagreement within your own caucus on whether or not this should be included in this payment. When your own leadership has different positions on this, I'm just wondering what.
I don't think that's accurate. I think that may be how it's reported. That's not accurate. What we've
Well,
said.
Pelosi and Hoyer are in different places.
Well, I think if they were both here right now, you'd find them very much in unison. I think how it's reported, it's sometimes interpreted to headlines, What I would say is that we stand united in understanding the impact of not funding the cost sharing will have on all of our constituents, especially those who have been able to take advantage of the Affordable Care Act and now have insurance where heretofore they were denied it. Let's be clear about this. It was a Republican-led lawsuit that led to the halting of these payments so far. They can withdraw that lawsuit right now. The funds are there for the cost-sharing purposes. And let's be clear, I think the American people know who's standing for the Affordable Care Act. Show of hands, is everyone here, who's in favor of the Affordable Care Act? And who is opposed? Well, they're not here, we know who they are, and they include the president. President, if there's one promise that maybe I hope he does break, is that he stops attacking the Affordable Care Act, because it's only hurting our fellow Americans. I'm a little concerned that this may be the one promise he will continue to keep, his efforts to destroy it. But they control the, now, there may very well be, that we don't have to add money to the appropriations bill, to the CR. This is not about new money, which is what the CR is about. It's to keep government running. That money's appropriate. There may be some language that can be changed. And quite frankly, I'm gonna tell you, I don't think my Republican colleagues want to see this go unfunded. The instability they would create in the markets would be monumental to themselves and in their states, where we've seen the expansion of Medicaid. And we also in those states that did not comply with the Affordable Care Act themselves, did not voluntarily enact the measures themselves, where the impact will be greatest is in those states, and I would say largely represented by Republicans.
So when the
And
speaker,
then Tony wanted to.
No, I just want to say, and then I'm not saying this in tongue in cheek, Joe Crowley just gave an example of, yes, it is complicated. And I think this president was making promises that he couldn't keep because he didn't realize these are real lives involved, it's real issues at stake, and he didn't realize when he made those campaign promises over and over that he would dismantle the Affordable Care Act. He didn't realize that he'd be taking health care away from tens of millions of Americans.
but the speaker said a little while ago that cost sharing is not in the CR, that there won't be any language about it at all. Is that a deal breaker for you guys at this point?
Look, I will say this, the responsibility of continuing the operation of government falls upon the majority. They determine when the bill comes to the floor and in what way it comes to the floor. If they need Democratic votes, they need to be talking to us about what is in and what is not in the bill. So if the president, if the speaker, I'm sure working on behalf of the president, is already making these decisions, let's be clear, they want the Affordable Care Act to fail. They will do everything they possibly can to see it fail.
Will you vote for it or not? if
I will
that's in
wait
there?
and see what the bill, what measures are in the bill, as it pertains not only Affordable Care Act, but I said before, to border security as well, and other issues, including Puerto Rico. There are a number of issues that I'm interested in the bill.
Can I-
Yes, Linda.
I think you will find that many Democrats would be opposed to voting for a CR if the cost sharing is not if language is not included. There are two separate issues that they are trying to conflate in order to gain leverage, quite frankly. And Republicans were gleeful about winning the House, the Senate, and the White House. The responsibility of governing rests squarely on their shoulders. And with their majorities, they should be able to pass a CR without a single Democratic vote. The responsibility lies with them, and if they're not able to do that, that's their fault. So again, Democrats will come to the table and work with them. We want a CR that's free of poison pills. And those poison pills are very intentional. And they know that each time that they insist on including those, they're losing Democrats. So whether or not they can unite their party and govern in the way that they are supposed to govern rests squarely on their shoulders.
And would you guys trust a statement from the White House that says, we're gonna take care of cost sharing the way
No,
we're supposed to?
personally, I do not trust anything that this president says. And again, I'm not trying to be funny, and with all due respect, he has flip-flopped on almost every single statement, every single sentence, every single tweet. Personally, I do not trust anything he says. I would like to see it in writing. I'd love to see it done through legislation.
I guess my question would be, given the nature of the questions you're asking, is whether or not you know something we don't, which is whether or not the Republicans don't have the votes. Because the only time that they'll come to us is if they don't have the votes. I think it's 241 now in the House. That's a lot more than 218. So, and the question is, what do they need from us? And the only time they're even going to discuss this with Democrats is if they don't have the votes. So if you're asking these questions and you're hearing these, it must be that they don't have the votes. And that's a good major statement, in my opinion, as to what the Republican majorities are doing in terms of getting their people together.
What about the idea here, though, that this is Trump's first test drive on a spending bill? Paul Ryan, first time having a completely Republican Congress with a Republican president, and the idea that they are just running out of track here. I mean, and that might catch them flat-footed. I mean, it's nearly 11 o'clock on Wednesday morning, and they won't even concede that they're ready to do a CR, when, you know, the size of this bill would be extraordinary. Even, you know, people would want to see the text of the CR and see what riders might be. What would you, does the lack of experience in the White House speak to this, or what do you see?
Well, I don't think there's any question that this has been less than stellar, I think, in terms of governing. These first 100 days have been by all measures, and I think, observers, even neutral observers, as being a disaster for the president. This is, and I think.
But is all that on him, or is that on the speaker, too?
Well, look, I think it's a combination of all. As I think Colleen Hanabusa just pointed out, they have an overwhelming majority here in the House. They have a majority, a working majority in the Senate, and they control the White House. I think the president's gone through a learning curve and continues to do that. It may be some time before he understands the legislative process and the limited powers of the presidency and the powers of the Congress itself. I think he got that first taste when he demanded a vote on the floor on the Affordable Care Act. It's not his position to demand anything here in the House or in the Senate. And to some degree, I'm not so sure that Mr. Ryan was trying to indicate that to him, but that's exactly what happened. They did try to put a bill on the floor. It was not primed. It was not ready, and I think they paid the consequence for that. So, look, we're all about understanding the ability to use training wheels and to get the two-wheeler rolling. But if they need our help and to govern, as Colleen said as well, then they'll need our input, and that's where Democrats, for lack of a better term, we have leverage. We look forward to working with our colleagues if that's the case. Otherwise, they're in charge. And I'll let Tony comment.
And that, Chad, that's a great question. But all you need to do is, the press has reported very well how many times the vice president has met with the Republicans, at least in our House, I'll use that example, and with the speaker himself, convening Republican after Republican after Republican group of members to try to govern. And the bottom line is they have been failing. So yes, I would say personally that yes, this is 100 days of failure out of the White House. And at the same time, it's amazing how when a party decides that they're going to try to do everything by themselves without including the other duly elected members of Congress, this is what happens. They are falling on their face and they're falling short on getting any of the things done that they promised the American public. And one of the things about the health care bill that failed was that it was so bad, thank God we have some moderate Republicans who would not vote for it because they were trying to go so far to the right, pushing 24 million people out of health care in the United States, and the list goes on.
Quite frankly, if you're on training wheels, I think you probably should let this budget, the CR, go at least complicated as possible. Mike?
Given that you do have leverage, as you just mentioned, and Boehner had to cross the aisle on spending bills, and Ryan would likely have to do the same this time around. But Leader Pelosi has demanded that the cost-sharing reductions be a part of this bill. So not to beat it to death, but is that still the position of the caucus?
Look, as we've said before, and quite frankly, we're not negotiating in public this issue. The appropriators are working, and they're meeting with their counterparts in the Senate to discuss these issues as well. What we're saying is that the money is there. This is not about appropriating monies or funds. These are appropriators who are negotiating. They're negotiating an appropriations bill. The president would like to see, and Republican colleagues would like to see, an increase in defense spending, reported up to about $15 billion. So what the appropriators are doing now is negotiating domestic spending, and to complement maybe, or to recognize any adjustments in appropriations. The cost-sharing piece is not an appropriation, okay? So I think we as Democrats stand behind the Affordable Care Act. We always have, we always will. We know what detriment it will bring to our nation if the president, as he has stated, he understands he's using this potentially as hostage. He wants to hold hostage the Affordable Care Act. It's not going to work. The American people know what he's doing. They see through this. They understand that he's in control of this. He could right now, and my Republican colleagues could withdraw their lawsuit, and they could actually spend these, shift these cost-sharing dollars out where they're needed. But they're choosing not to do that at the moment. Yes.
Moving away a little bit from the spending bill, you mentioned earlier that the president's tax plan might have a couple of sweeteners for Democrats. It's been reported that one of those things could be something that has to do with infrastructure. Would infrastructure combined with the tax plan actually make you all more willing to work with them on taxes, or would your caucus prefer that infrastructure is dealt with separately in a separate bill?
Let me say that a proposal does not an accomplishment make. Simply proposing something, was it 3 days before the deadline of his first 100 days? It's not an accomplishment. The president apparently has proposed a number of issues that haven't come to fruition at all legislatively. What I would suggest on this, and I said, as difficult as it is to work in silos as a member of the Ways and Means Committee, I stand ready, and I think I speak on behalf of Ms. Sanchez as well, and all of us, whether on the committee or not, to work with our Republican counterpart to address the issues of the code itself, which is, on its face, overly complicated because it's inefficient, it's unfair in many respects, and it doesn't promote growth here in the United States, it actually promotes growth overseas. Those are things that Democrats and Republicans can agree upon. So now let's come back and talk about a number that's real in terms of the corporate rate. 15% corporate rate in conjunction with 15% for pass-through for partnerships creates a $2.4 trillion deficit over the next 10 years. Deficit, not paid for. President doesn't propose any paid fors that I'm aware of in this. That's not responsible. That's not even a proposal, quite frankly. That's just taking a number out of the sky and saying, I like 15. We as Democrats have said, we know he can get to 28% without much, you can change things around a bit in terms of expensing. Get to 25% is very difficult. Getting to 20% is like impossible. Getting to 15 is not even a start. Republican House Ways and Means chairman is not starting at 15%. He's starting at 20%. So I think they need to get their act together, quite frankly. They obviously have it. As I said before, and I'll say it again, a proposal does not an accomplishment make. Doesn't go, you don't get to score one for the Gippy here in this one. It's a non-starter in that regard.
And also, by what Joe, Congressman Crowley just mentioned to your question about infrastructure, they would be burning the candle at both ends. When you cut $2.4 trillion out of the revenue to use for infrastructure, for example, that means you're burning the candle at both ends. So they're not making any sense. Again, once again, the president is juxtaposing himself against his own rhetoric.
And I would just add on the tail end of that, they've proven incredibly inept at passing anything. So adding two complex issues together, I don't think bodes well for a successful outcome. I think they need to keep it simple.
When they've yanked the healthcare bill off the floor, recall and remember what Speaker Ryan said. Speaker Ryan said there's a difference, they learned the difference basically as to what is it like to finally govern. And I think that's where we're at. They're learning what it's like to govern, and it's not simple. And again, if learning to govern is what resulted with that mess, and now we are hearing about all these different deals that they want to find out if Democrats are willing to buy into, it just tells me that they're still having a difficulty governing. And they have to stop doing that because the cost is being paid by the American public. They have got to get their own house in order because the people suffering are the working people, that they are the ones who said, the president promised that he was going to make life better for them. And all that they've managed to do is make things worse.
I know the House is getting a briefing as well tonight on North Korea. How confident are you that this situation is going to calm down under this president, or where do you stand on that right now?
Boy, is that what kind of question is that in terms of whether it'll soften or reduce? I mean, it is a very dangerous time that we live in with an erratic leader. I'm talking about North Korea. That is a threat to not only its own initial region, but to the world. And we take it very, very seriously. We're going to, we'll hear what the administration has to say about this. And the hope is that we can find a way forward and ratchet down maybe some of the rhetoric and hopes that that will also reduce the rhetoric coming from North Korea itself. But what the plan is going forward in terms of engaging the rest of the world. As I said, you know, I thought it was good to see the president's daughter shake the hand of Angela Merkel yesterday. It would have been nice had the president done that as well, in anticipation that maybe we need allies, maybe we need the world working together to address rogue nations like North Korea. That those relationships beyond Germany includes France, it includes Great Britain and more of our natural allies, it includes India, and it includes China. And we just, at this point, China vetoed the resolution before the Security Council last week as it pertains to North Korea. That was not what we had hoped in terms of the expectation after the premier had met with President Trump, but it did happen. So what is working, what's not working? I think it's good the president's coming to us on this, and I'll turn to Colleen to address other issues pertaining to the War Powers Act and the role of Congress as well.
Actually, you should go to HASC right now, because testifying there is Admiral Harris, the commander of the Pacific Command, and he has said from prior years that the thing that keeps him up at night is North Korea. He goes to bed thinking about it, he wakes up thinking about North Korea. Your question regarding the president, remember he said he dispatched the Carl Vinson, and we knew that he didn't dispatch the Carl Vinson, it actually went to Australia and then turned around and was making its normal trip. So I think there may be a disconnect as to how serious North Korea is. But from the Pacific Command's position, North Korea is very serious. In addition to that, as you all know, we are in a position where we have the Pacific arena, we also have what's going on in the Middle East. And the Middle East is a different situation with Syria, and the issue that we're gonna have to resolve there is whether or not the president has the quote, the powers to do what he's doing there as well. So North Korea, remember Korea is still technically, we're in an armistice there. We're not, that war hasn't technically ended. So we have to think about all the various situations, but for the Asia Pacific theater, which is very important to me from Hawaii, it is a critical component.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.